This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
What's up, jerks?
Manning retired.
Which one?
Both.
I like kickers.
Put him on the board. Hausch Mazzoli. Got it. Championship.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, brought to you by the Fan Up Network. As always, I am Jason Jarvi. Follow me on Twitter at Jarvi the King. And with me again this week is my brother, Joel. How's it going?
It's going great, Jason. We are very, very close to real football.
We are. We're in week 3 of the preseason. We're close to college football. And how pumped are you to actually see people run the actual offenses and not see this vanilla stuff that all we've been seeing for the past couple weeks?
It's going to be so great. I'm so tired of preseason already. I don't even know that I've watched a complete game. It's ridiculous, and it's so outdated, and I don't know why the NFL is still doing it. Well, I take that back. I know why the NFL is still doing it, and it's all about money. Oh,
it's completely all about money. I would love to go see a preseason game, but only pay like $10 for it, because that's all it's really worth, because it's a glorified practice. I understand what it's for, because the guys who are third and fourth on the depth chart, they need to measure how they can stack up against NFL talent. But to charge people full price for this, it makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah, the NFL is never going to ever put money back into your pocket, so you might as well just enjoy it and enjoy the ride.
Now, I did just think of one way fantasy footballers could make the preseason interesting. You could actually have fantasy football during preseason football.
I like it.
And maybe have that determine draft order.
How about you draft guys, and if they actually make the 53-man roster, you get bonus points?
I think that's one.
Let's do it.
I think another one is basically you just pick a roster and you stick with it for the entire preseason and see who does the best, because you can have guys pick the big guys, the Drew Brees, the Aaron Rodgers, but they're probably not going to pay. They're probably not going to play in the preseason. So you have to rely on starting a Trevor Siemian or going in, Niall Davis, hope that he blows up in the preseason.
Yeah, what if you did it just to where the better guys, you get less points, because they're obviously locked in. They're going to make the roster. I meant like you'd have a draft of guys who are on the bubble. So like a guy like if you pegged before the season that Dwayne Washington was going to be a serious contender to be in the mix for the Detroit Lions running back, then you should get more points for that.
I would get more points because I like Dwayne Washington, and I told everybody Stephen Ridley is garbage, and he's no longer on the Lions. I just wanted to point that out. I had to point that out to the doc, and he's got to respect, because Stephen Ridley sucks. Balls. But let's move on to NFL news. There's actually some really big news, big things happening to some of the biggest players in fantasy football. Earlier in the week, probably the biggest news is Le'Veon Bell. His suspension came down. It was reduced from 4 games to 3 games. So not that much big of a difference. And I'm still going to stand by my saying that he really shouldn't be a first round pick unless you're in a 12-team league or a 14-team league. I think Le'Veon Bell, he shouldn't be drafted in the first round, and I know I'm going to get some flack for it, but my argument would be that if you draft Le'Veon Bell in the first round, you're going to have to then plan the draft around Le'Veon Bell. You're going to have to plan for those first 3 weeks, whereas my drafting style, I like to go in and let the draft come to me. And if I have to have in the back of my mind that I'm going to need a pretty decent running back to replace Le'Veon Bell for the first 3 weeks, and maybe who knows if he gets hurt later in the year, it's just going to kind of throw off my draft. I mean, how do you feel about that?
So, I mean, we talked a couple weeks ago about the implications of drafting Tommy, and I think we talked about then that if you are going to target Tom Brady as your quarterback, then you need to really structure your draft around that. And you're right, it really handcuffs you to a point where you're not going to be able to take best player available. You're going to have a plan, you're going to have to stick to it. And that's just not how fantasy drafts work. So that being said, I think you can make the argument that Le'Veon Bell, I think naturally, I don't know what he's going in ADP right now, but I mean, he doesn't slip any further than a second or third rounder.
Currently, he is 13th overall in ADP.
Yeah.
Which would just put him outside of the top 10. But who knows? Le'Veon Bell is a game changer. If he plays every single game, he has every ability to be the top back.
Yeah. He's not, if you're the kind of fantasy football manager that doesn't want to be, they want to draft their team, they want to set a starting lineup, and then forget it, drafting Le'Veon Bell's not going to be for you. If you want to manage your team and scour the waiver wire and work moves, Le'Veon Bell is such a great, again, we talked about this also with Tom Brady. What an amazing piece of trade bait, right? You stash him on your bench, you get ready to come back. Maybe you start out of the gate hot. That's an awesome piece of trade bait, and you can't really discount that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you get lucky, and the running back you got to replace Bell for the first couple of weeks is having a good season or starts off the season hot. Maybe you were lucky last year. You got Devontae Freeman. Then you go into week 3. That's really when you need to start trying to think about making that move. Before, Bell's going to have a high value at that point because he's coming back, because he's likely going to be completely healthy. But if he slides, then you lose all that value. If he doesn't perform or he tweaks something, then you're looking at basically busting your roster.
So besides always being suspended at the beginning of the season, are you saying you're concerned about his health and his durability in the NFL?
I have to. I think 5 seasons in, he's been injured in parts of 3 seasons now. And this past season, he's coming off of a major knee injury. So you got to be worried a little bit. I have to believe at some point he's not going to be suspended at the beginning of the season. Who knows? But I do have questions about his durability, and I know people are really surefire about him, but it's just a question mark in my head.
Yeah, maybe this is blasphemous to say, but I remember another high draft pick on our favorite team who had injury problems his first couple of seasons. And I remember thinking, man, another blown pick by the Lions. This guy's never going to pan out and do what we wanted him to do. That guy was Matt Stafford. And I think we can say now, looking back at his career, his full career, that durability is not an issue for that guy. He's tough as nails. He just had some bad luck at the beginning of his career. I kind of feel like Le'Veon Bell falls into that category where he's had some injuries that ding him up and slow him down. But in the end, I really feel like when, 6-7 years from now, we're going to laugh at durability when it comes to Le'Veon Bell.
And I hope that's the case, but for right now, it's still in the back of my mind because he hasn't strung together those years of playing 16 full games healthy, not seeing a hamstring injury bothering him. And we'll see. But moving on, the Cowboys. They were a promising team going into the preseason or going into this season. They drafted Ezekiel Elliott high, and we thought that maybe they had the second coming of the trio again. But all 3 of their big 3 are in the news. Tony Romo in their preseason game took probably the biggest hit he's taken in the past couple of years, and he went down with a back injury. Now, sources are saying that he went to the sideline and he was petitioning with the coach to go back in, but they held him out. And that's probably for a really good reason, because if the Cowboys are going to succeed, they're probably going to need Tony Romo healthy, and they're going to have to keep him upright.
So then you're telling... So here we go. So Tony Romo injured again. What about Dak Prescott, though? I've been seeing really good things about him. Last night against the Seahawks, he plays 3 quarters, 17 for 23, 116 yards, 1 touchdown, and a 99.2 passer rating. That's impressive against the Seahawks. He had a very similar stat line the week prior against the Dolphins. So let's just, obviously preseason, whatever, we know he's playing against vanilla defenses. He's not going to see one scheme that he sees in the preseason in the regular season. But maybe, everyone wants to talk about how Ezekiel Elliott's the big draft pick. Maybe it's Dak Prescott.
I think that's possible. But it's going to be Tony Romo's team until he gets hurt in the regular season, and that's when we'll really see what Dak Prescott can do. Because I fully believe that at some point this year, Romo's going to go down. Either he's going to miss part of a game or he's going to miss multiple games, and then we'll really see what Dak Prescott can do. And who knows? I think he's probably a little bit more mobile than Tony Romo, which...
Well, that's not tough to do.
Yeah, it's not tough to do. I might be a little bit more mobile than Tony Romo.
You're light on your feet.
I am.
Nimble.
Big man, but light on my feet. But who knows? Maybe they can change that offense a little bit and be able to spread out Ezekiel Elliott a little bit more, be able to get Dez Bryant some open looks. That's really interesting. I think that could be part of a King's decree that Dak Prescott might be the better rookie on the Cowboys this year.
I like it. That's good stuff.
That's for you. But also, I told you that all three of the Cowboys' big guys are in the news. Ezekiel Elliott still dealing with his domestic assault issue. That hasn't been resolved yet. But now videos have surfaced of him when they were in Seattle that he went into a weed dispensary. Jerry Jones says that it did not... the look just doesn't... it's not a good look to have. And NFL, just legalize marijuana. Just do it.
I think it's kind of got to be America first.
I get it. I get it. But there's nothing illegal. It was in Washington. It is legal to recreationally buy it. But there is no video of him actually buying or partaking of a substance. Does this worry you that these are now two things in his first offseason? Should we worry about Elliott going forward being a problem?
I don't know, Jason. Where there's smoke, there's fire.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Bingo. No, so here's the thing, right? I mean, these guys, I can't understand guys making poor decisions. Like, there's so much money and there's so much just publicity and everything on the line for them to make bad decisions like this, and for him to make possibly multiple bad decisions. It's a red flag for sure. There's just too much on the line, Elliott. Like, stay out of there.
And now I gotta hope, though, this is a team that dealt with Dez Bryant, and I feel like Dez Bryant at least in the last 2 or 3 years has matured, and he was a guy who had a lot of issues. And I think if any team can do it, the Cowboys can. They'll spend the money and they'll do whatever it takes to get this guy on the right track. So I'm not going to let it affect my draft status of him at this point. I still think he's one of probably in the top 10 of running backs, even though he hasn't proven anything. But just the hype around him and with the Cowboys' offensive line.
Oh, yeah, when you're running behind that line.
I mean, you could put Stephen Ridley behind that offensive line, and he'd probably get 1,000 yards.
Let's hope not.
But the last of the big three on the Cowboys, Dez Bryant, he suffered a concussion in practice. Concussions are probably one of the hardest things to diagnose in sports. With a torn ACL, the length. Usually, it's going to be about a year recovery. With a hamstring injury, it's probably going to linger. With broken bones, those are 4 to 6 weeks. But concussions are just, it's your brain. There isn't an exact science for everybody's brain. We're being in Detroit. We know about in hockey with the Red Wings, Johan Franzen. Mm-hmm. That guy he's just plagued by concussions. He hasn't played in so long, but he still suffers headaches every day. It's hard for him to stand up. But then you have other guys who they'll get a concussion and they're right back on their feet within a couple days. I think this is really going to have to be a wait and see, and you're going to have to watch Dez Bryant to see how he comes back from this concussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dez's history shows that he bounces back and that he comes back just as strong. So I would say that, like you said, pay attention, watch. I mean, do you feel like he falls out of the top 10 wide receivers, really?
No, I don't think he falls out of top 10. Just the talent that he has, and I think Dez has been getting a little disrespect this year, and it's probably because the quarterback position is a little uncertain for the Cowboys. If he has Tony Romo is completely healthy, I think Dez Bryant will have a really good year. And who knows, I think they just need some sort of stability at that position for Dez to really succeed. Moving on to a team outside of the Cowboys, the Patriots got some bad news this week. Their running back Dion Lewis, who suffered a torn ACL last year, apparently suffered a setback, which it's not good for the Patriots. He looked good all through the off-season camps, and they were saying that he was looking surprisingly well. But now he has to have another procedure done, and they're saying that he's going to be out about 8 to 10 weeks, and he's a candidate to be on the PUP list designated for return. This really affects his draft status, and I'm not even sure if he should be drafted in most leagues.
I don't think so. I don't think an 8 to 10 week recovery, you can't wait around, especially if he ends up on the PUP list. He's going to be a guy that if you want to snap him up off a waiver wire, try to be cute a couple weeks before he's scheduled to come back, and you have room on your roster to do that, then go for it. But, I mean, do you really think he's going to go through an 8 to 10 week recovery, and you really think that he's going to come back and he's just going to instantly be plugged in as the starter?
No, and definitely not on the Patriots. The Patriots are that kind of team where if James White is producing and LeGarrette Blount is doing something with the team, then he's not hurt or smoking weed, they're probably just going to roll with what they got. I'm sure that they'll work Dion Lewis back in, but I wouldn't assume that he gets healthy and Bill Belichick is like, oh, great, we got our starting running back, because I don't think there's any starting running back. I mean, look at what happened in the past when Shane Vereen has gotten hurt, and then he comes back. He doesn't come back. They don't rush him back and give him full reps.
Yeah, no, one of the things that is true, that is a rock-solid fact when it comes to fantasy football, is that Bill Belichick hates you. He hates you, the fantasy player, and he will do whatever he can to make sure that you have a bad fantasy week. So I would stay clear of Dion Lewis. Between James White and LeGarrette Blount, I think I like James White a little more. Read something about how he's got really good hands, and we all know who the quarterback is for the Patriots. So
yeah, I think I read somewhere that in the last 4 weeks of the season, James White was one of the leading receivers in those last 4 weeks. So that is something to look at. But as you said, Bill Belichick hates you, and if White drops a couple passes, it could be bad news, and he may be on the bench. And they may go with Tyler Gaffney, or maybe they'll pick up Stephen Ridley.
They'll grab anybody, plug him in, and he'll have a good game.
Because it's the Patriots.
Yep.
Going to the Redskins, running back Matt Jones, who we've talked about on this podcast, he's a big question mark, who he has a lot of talent, but the questions with him were fumbling and durability, and now he's down. He injured his AC joint, which is in his shoulder. They're holding him out the rest of the preseason. They're saying he's ready for week 1, but I think the shoulder for a running back is something that's really, it's something important because you're getting hit every single play. And if he hits it the wrong way or he goes down on it, he could be done for the season.
Yeah, I'd steer clear. I'd steer clear of the Redskins running game in general. I don't know that any of them are really worth it at this point.
Yeah, I think you really have to be careful drafting Matt Jones. I would probably drop him at least a round with his average draft position, maybe even more. If I had to look at one of those Washington running backs, Chris Thompson, if you were in a PPR league, because he really is kind of viewed as that receiving running back. And then I'd probably I like Keith Marshall. And it's really a toss-up right now between him and another undrafted free agent to get that number 3 running back spot. But it really is, they're going to pass a lot in Washington.
As they should.
Another big guy who got hurt, Julio Jones. He went down in their preseason game with an ankle injury. They're saying that he could have came back, but does this affect his draft position at all? Because right now I think he's slated in the top 5 overall with ADP.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, he's definitely a top 5 wide receiver, and I don't know why any of those 5 receivers are playing even a snap in the preseason. It's ridiculous, and I'm fine with never seeing any of those studs play a preseason game. They don't need it. Let's be real. They don't need it. And all it's going to do is get them injured, or I don't know. That's it. That's really the only thing that can come of it.
Yeah, it really doesn't bother me. If this was a little bit more serious, if they would have came out and they would have said that, Julio, he's day-to-day now. But because they said that he probably could have came back and they're kind of just playing it off, it doesn't affect my draft status for Julio Jones because he's been one of the stud wide receivers the last couple of years between him and Antonio Brown. And then if you want to throw in Odell Beckham Jr. for the last 2 years, those guys have been the most dependable players in fantasy football. Outside of all players, really. Mm-hmm. They're the guys they're going to get play. And Julio Jones it's kind of a Calvin Johnson thing because the team isn't that great, but Matt Ryan seems to give him the ball enough times for Jones to really excel.
You just got to get it close to him.
Moving on to a team that is near and dear to our hearts, the Detroit Lions. Running back Amir Abdullah, who has been sidelined for pretty much the entire preseason, he's off the PUP list. He's been doing some work with the team, and he's saying that he's itching to play. Now, do you want to see Amir Abdullah play at all in the preseason? And how comfortable do you feel drafting him? And where would you want him to be? What would you want him to be on your team?
So again, Amir Abdullah, I feel like in the preseason, I mean, the exact opposite of guys like Julio Jones and OBJ. Like, I want to see Amir Abdullah play in the preseason because I haven't seen him play enough in the regular season. And issues that he had in college that carried over into the pros, I want to see him play, and I want to see those issues go away. I can't handle his fumbling issue and his bad hands. He's had it in college. He's got it in the pros. I mean, I don't know any guys that had fumbling issues that eventually got better at it. Like either you do it or you don't. So I feel like this guy needs reps. He needs to play. And what's amazing to me is, as Lions fans, we sit here and we talk about how, well, we've got Theo Riddick and we've got Zach Zenner and we've got Dwayne Washington, and like, I love those guys, and I want to see those guys do well, but none of them are stud running backs. Amir Abdullah has potential and could be a stud running back. We need him to do well for the Lions to do well. So, I mean, that's the Lions fan part of me. Fantasy-wise, if fantasy is truly about minimizing risk, Amir Abdullah is not someone I want on my fantasy team. I'd love to cheer for him. We love to cheer for Lions in fantasy, but in the end, he's too risky for me. If it's a value pick, then that's a whole other story, because obviously value picks are one thing. But if I'm reaching or I'm even taking him at ADP, I don't know that I could do that.
Yeah, you really shouldn't be reaching for Amir Abdullah unless you're really, really strapped at running back. Even at that point, there's got to be somebody else that I would take over Amir Abdullah. He is a starter, so he does have some of that value. But can he stay healthy? Can he fix those issues? Because we haven't seen that in the regular season or in the preseason, we're going to have to we're just going to have to trust that he's fixed it and that he's going to be good in the regular season. So, yeah, I don't want him as more than a backup running back on my team.
Let's play the game. Who would you rather have?
Okay.
Ready?
Let's do it.
Lamar Miller or Amir Abdullah?
Lamar Miller every day. Lamar Miller is probably a top 10 running back this year.
Doug Martin or Amir Abdullah?
Doug Martin.
CJ Anderson or Amir Abdullah?
I'd probably go CJ Anderson, even though he did nothing last year.
Carlos Hyde or Amir Abdullah?
At that point, I think I'll go to Amir Abdullah.
Okay. Danny Woodhead or Amir Abdullah?
I'm going to go Amir Abdullah.
Okay. That's interesting. So all those guys are ranked right around Amir Abdullah, above, below. There were two guys below, Woodhead and CJ Anderson. Or no, I'm sorry, Carlos Hyde, that you said you'd take, who are ranked lower than Amir Abdullah. I feel like ESPN's giving him a lot of love.
Well, I think it's mainly because he's a starting running back. Danny Woodhead he's behind Melvin Gordon right now. And CJ Anderson, it's such a mess, that Denver Broncos running back situation with CJ Anderson and Ronnie Hillman, and then you add in the Devontae Booker. I just don't. There's no certain guy who's gonna be good on the Broncos running back situation. Yeah. Another guy who I would definitely probably take over Amir Abdullah at this point is Miami Dolphins running back Arian Foster, who had a pretty decent showing. He scored his first touchdown as a Dolphin in their preseason game. He has that spot locked up. And what do you think we can expect out of Arian Foster? I think when he first signed with the Dolphins, there was very, very low expectations, thinking that he's going to basically just be a contributor on the offense. But he immediately came in and showed that he was the best running back that was there, which isn't a whole lot to say because the best running back at the time was Jay Ajayi. So can you rely on Arian Foster at this point right now? Do you feel comfortable having him being a starting player on your roster, whether it be a running back or a flex player?
I would love to start Arian Foster as a flex player. I think that's a stud flex. I really feel like Arian Foster could surprise a lot of people this season. Again, yeah, he's been dinged up, but that works both ways. Like if you can stay healthy, if you can come back healthy, that's less tread on your tires. So is he a true 30-plus-year-old running back, or does he have less tread on his tires, and can he be a solid contributor? I guess the question I think also is key is, do you believe, I keep hearing that the Dolphins they're right there, they're going to make the next step. They've got the defense, and now they've got the quarterback, and now they've got the wide receiver. Like, do you feel like the Dolphins can make the next step? And if that's the case, draft Arian Foster with confidence.
Yeah, and I probably just I want to keep him on my ADP. I don't want to reach for him because more than likely he's going to get hurt at some point. There's guys who just like Tony Romo, that at some point in the season they're going to get hurt. They're going to miss a game here or there. I think Arian Foster is that kind of player. I think it's too confident to say that you can rely on him for an entire season of fantasy football.
Fair enough.
Going on to the Cleveland Browns, the wide receivers Corey Coleman and Josh Gordon both slated to make their first preseason start. Josh Gordon going to miss the first 4 games, serving a suspension, which I don't really understand why. You know, he sat out all of last year and now he has to serve another 4 games. They're saying there was rumors that teams were calling to try and trade for Josh Gordon, but the Browns squashed that, said that they want Josh Gordon on their team. And Corey Coleman, the big guy that they went out and drafted this year to be their really good, their top wide receiver. How do you feel about these wide receivers in fantasy football, and where would you draft them?
Well, right now, I mean, you've got Josh Gordon projected outside the top 25 of wide receivers, possibly outside the top 30 of wide receivers. Again, I think he's a value pick. I think he's not a guy that you're not going to draft him expecting him to be your wide receiver 1. You're going to draft him to stash him and then possibly have a stud on your bench come in after he serves his suspension. Generally speaking, again, who's throwing the ball in Cleveland? Who's their quarterback?
Robert Griffin.
Yeah, minimize your risk. And I'm going to go ahead and stay away from Browns wide receivers.
Do they have value in drafting them, though, don't they?
Yes, absolutely.
So they should be rostered. Are you picking Coleman or Gordon first?
I'm going to take Coleman first.
Because he can play the first 4 games.
It's simple. It's math. He's got the potential to score more points. So I'm going to minimize risk, and I'm going to go with the guy that's playing.
So currently on ADP, Gordon is listed at 38 for wide receivers, and Corey Coleman is at 45. So that's it's almost a little high. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, because you're looking at the starting wide receivers take up the first 20, and then next 20 are all your backups and the guys that you're going to rely on for flex positions. That's essentially putting Gordon in a flex position and Coleman right on the cusp of that.
I mean, don't you feel like, though, Gordon's shown that he shows top 10 potential. So, I mean, to say that you could get him 38th or 45th overall, I mean, I don't feel like that's too high. I still feel like that could be a potential great deal.
We'll see. I mean, who knows? Maybe by the week 4 he'll have another incident. I'm not going to believe he's actually going to be on the field until he gets on the field. But hopefully this is different because he really is a game changer. And if you do draft him, there's probably a good chance he's going to make a difference on your team. Going to the Broncos, the quarterback situation, Joel doesn't believe me, but apparently Trevor Siemian has emerged as the best option as their number one quarterback. Do you believe this at all, or are you just gonna stay away from Broncos quarterbacks altogether and let that play out until week 1?
Yeah, I feel like this is preseason rhetoric. It's NFL teams being goofy and saying things that I can't buy. I can't buy that it's Trevor Siemian. They drafted Paxton Lynch way too high, and they loved Paxton Lynch because don't forget, Connor Cook was available for the Broncos to take and could have been a very good heir apparent to Peyton. They love Paxton Lynch. He's gonna play. I don't buy the fact that he doesn't play this season.
I'm not sure. I think he plays this season, but come week 1, I think there is a pretty decent chance that Trevor Siemian could play. And I think that offense is basically, that whole team is just kind of set up for success. They're built on their defense. Trevor Siemian isn't going to have to make a ton of crazy throws. And he does have a pretty nice cast to play with. He's thrown to Demaryius Thomas. He still has Emmanuel Sanders. C.J. Anderson is okay out of the backfield. Trevor Siemian, I think he could be... I take that back. I think he has the potential to be a decent backup quarterback, but going into your draft, you should probably just let him slide. You really should just let all the Broncos quarterbacks slide.
Depending on your starting structure of do you start one quarterback or two quarterbacks, there's just no reason to roll the dice on it.
No. Going to the Seattle Seahawks, Thomas Rawls is saying that he will play in the season opener, but he's been saying that all along, and Pete Carroll has been saying that you don't know how long his injury is going to be. This has to be some concern for fantasy owners because I'm not sure what he's going to do. And CJ Prosise finally came back. He's available for their preseason game. They really like Christian Michael. I think that you might want to stay away from that Seahawks running back situation for the beginning portion of your drafts.
Yeah, if you can somehow grab those guys though in your draft and not have to count on or not have to make that call week 1, that would be ideal. Unfortunately though, I think if you're grabbing those guys, if you're grabbing Thomas Rawls, he's probably gonna have to be your RB1, RB2 for sure.
Yeah, and that's risky. And as we said, it's all about minimizing risk. I would let him slide as far as you can until it gets almost ridiculous to see where his average draft position is. That's when I would take Thomas Rawls. Last bit of news, a little bit interesting, not injury related, but it could affect you in your fantasy season. Cincinnati Bengals number 1 wide receiver AJ Green. He's expecting his firstborn child at the end of September. And he's already come out and said that if it happens on a game day, he's not going to miss the birth of his child. Should this drop him down in draft status, or do you just roll with the punches with AJ Green?
AJ Green is the kind of wide receiver that you roll with the punches. There's 7 days a week. I like the odds that the birth does not happen on a Sunday. He's one of those guys you just draft and you play. You don't worry about it. And it's 1 week of fantasy at the end of the day too. Like, I really feel I would much rather, hey, if he wants to fall and he can fall to me and I can get a value on him, absolutely. Everybody else, feel free to be afraid of the guy missing a game for the birth of his child, but I'm not going to worry about that.
Well, I will let him fall to you because I hate AJ Green. He's one of my players that I hate. So it has nothing to do with wanting to miss a game for the birth of his child. I applaud him for that, actually. But he's a guy, even though he is a really good wide receiver, I can't believe in him. He seems to always be on the injury list. I hate him, but that might just be prejudiced for a season in the past. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the number 1 overall pick in fantasy draft. We're going to debate on who that really should be, and we'll have arguments for a bunch of players. And I do want to talk with Joel a little bit about the new rules about the injury designation in the NFL and how it's going to kill fantasy football players. You're listening to the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. The Fantasy Nerd Show is sponsored by the Fan Up Network. They've developed the ultimate fantasy football app. It's a one-stop shop for everything you need. You can track teams and scores across multiple platforms, get latest injury and player news, and access to expert advice. See the hot trends with waiver pickups and drops. It has everything you need to manage all your fantasy football teams. Android users can get the app in the Play Store, and an iPhone version is now available in the App Store. Go to fanupnetwork.com to learn more and follow them on Twitter at fanupnetwork. Welcome back to the Fantasy Nerd Show on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. Right now, I want to talk with my brother about the injury designation that the NFL, they changed the rules. The past, for really forever, it was always if it was somebody was hurt, they were either designated as probable, questionable, or doubtful. And they've completely done away with probable now. So now everybody's either going to be questionable or doubtful. And this really was a tool for fantasy football players because you relied on, if a guy was designated probable, you were pretty sure that they were going to play. If they were questionable, you were always rolling the dice and you had to check back before game time started. And now with everybody being questionable, it's going to make life hell for fantasy football players.
For sure. You're going to have to be on the ball. You're going to have to be with your phone, ready to go and make changes on the fly. It's going to be hell on fantasy football commissioners because I guarantee you we're going to be getting lots of calls that this guy all of a sudden isn't playing.
Yeah. How long do you think it's going to take, in our league specifically, that it'll come down that somebody was questionable and they ended up injured, but then they wanted to change it and they couldn't? How long do you think it's going to take for that to happen?
I don't know. Can we do an over-under? Because,
I would put over-under week 4.
I'll take the under.
So you think...
I think it's going to happen in week 1 or 2 or 3. I really do. It's just knowing our league and the guys and stuff like that, the commissions are going to be getting calls about, I need to put this guy in, I need to pick this guy up, I need to drop this guy.
So the tip for all of you fantasy football players out there, all the listeners, obviously, if you're listening to this, I would hope that you're playing fantasy football, or maybe you just stumbled across this podcast and you're still about 40 minutes in and wondering what we're talking about. You're going to have to watch your team. You can't just rely on the P or the Q or the D next to your player anymore. You're going to have to click on the player. You're going to have to check their status. I always say that you should be watching throughout the week, but at the least, you need to be checking your players before their game time. Whether it's a couple hours, at least a couple hours, at the latest the hour before.
Yeah, let's be real. You should have a smartphone. Your league should be being ran on either ESPN or Yahoo. They both have apps. There's no reason that you can't be plugged into your team the hour before the game. It takes 5 minutes.
I know. You can check the Fan Up Network app because they'll have all your injury updates. There you go. So that's a great program you can use. You can install it on your Apple and your Android devices.
Do it.
They're great. That's a great thing to use. Moving on from this whole injury list, I think that's pretty much wrapped up. You just have to watch your players.
Yeah, it's going to be a nightmare. Enjoy.
So in our big league, the American Slackjaw League, our draft is just about 2 weeks away. It's almost time for Christmas, and Joel has the first pick in our draft.
Woo!
He won the toilet bowl last year and got that first overall pick. Are you excited at all, or are you a little nervous?
So I'm used to drafting at about 5th. That seems to be like where I draft all the time.
That's where I draft this year.
Yeah. So, and to be honest with you, I kind of like 5 because it takes. I feel like there's a lot of pressure on the first couple picks to really nail those. And when you're picked 5, you kind of just, like you said, you like to let the draft come to you. At 5, you kind of let the draft come to you. And who's gone already. And then it kind of becomes a little clearer, like, this guy makes a lot more sense. So at 1, to have every single NFL player available to me. We don't have keepers in the league this year. So it's literally anybody. It's a little mind-boggling.
You have the greatest chance to mess up.
Yes.
Because any of these guys can get hurt.
Yeah, and you've got 19 picks between your next pick.
Yep, it does suck. And just looking at ADP, obviously Antonio Brown. This is probably the first time in my lifetime that I've seen a wide receiver at that be just... He's the unanimous number 1 over the majority of the sites. I'm looking at it. Yahoo, ESPN, CBS, Fantasy Football Central, NFL, and Fantrax all have Antonio Brown as the number 1 guy.
That's unprecedented. Like, I don't know if that's ever happened.
There's always a debate between a running back. It's always AP or Jamal Charles,
Marshall Faulk or Terrell Davis
or Sean Richardson,
or that guy.
Yeah. Sean Richard. I hate his name so much I didn't even remember it. Sean Alexander. Where did I come up with Richardson?
I don't know.
Because I think I was relating him to Trent Richardson, probably. Because that's how good he was.
He was pretty awful. But no, I don't know that I've ever seen this. So you've got an unprecedented time where you have everybody in fantasy agreeing on one guy. And not only that, for him to be a wide receiver. For old school fantasy players, this is so against everything that's been ingrained in my nature of being a fantasy football player. But you can't deny his track record and his season in and season out scoring. It's crazy. I don't want to be the guy that makes the unanimous pick and then he dies.
You're probably gonna have to live with that, though. Outside of him, I think Julio Jones. We talked about it before the show. Antonio Brown, and I almost just said Sean Richardson again. Antonio Brown and Julio Jones have probably been the most dependable fantasy players in the last recent years. They just get the job done. They always score you points. So they're going to be 2 of the players within the top 4 taken in most drafts this year, most likely.
Indeed.
And so it's really just deciding on who do you think is going to be the better player. So can we make a case to draft a running back over Antonio Brown at this point?
I don't know. Let's try.
So just going off ADP, there's 3 real names who are listed for running back. You're looking at Todd Gurley, Adrian Peterson, and David Johnson. David Johnson, I'm just going to immediately discount.
Yes.
I don't like David Johnson. A lot of fantasy experts like him, but I think they like him for no apparent reason. And he's on the Cardinals team. I'm going to let somebody else draft him. Even if in our draft at 5, David Johnson slides to me, I'm probably going to let him go because I don't... Just like you don't want to be Antonio Brown and have him fail, David Johnson has just red flags all over for me. He's the Curtis Martin and the Sean Alexander. I got it right this time.
There you go.
He's the guy who he's the hot pick and he's going to be good this year, and he's probably going to suck.
I can't see him. I can't even see him being mentioned in the same conversation as Gurley and AP.
I mean, I would put Ezekiel Elliott over David Johnson at this point, just because, even though he's a rookie, and I have no idea what he's going to do this year, I like where he is. I like him running behind that backfield. I would rather do him over David Johnson. But let's focus on the other 2, Todd Gurley and AP. Basically the old school running back and the new guy who's coming in. They're both really good. And I think you can make a case for taking either of those guys number 1, at least the number 1 overall running back. And I think there's even an argument for them to be the number 1 overall pick.
Yeah, I think the only thing that scares me a little bit is just AP getting a little long in the tooth. And again, I'm not saying that he's going to fall off, or he's never fallen off. And he'll probably have a fantastic fantasy season. I feel like right now, if I have the number 1 pick in the draft and I've got to pick between AP and Todd Gurley, if I'm not doing a wide receiver, let's assume that right now, I think I'm going to go Todd Gurley. He's just a young stud, and there's nobody else in St. Louis, they're going to give him the ball 20, 30 times a game.
I think that is one issue you're going to have to worry about, though, is that he is pretty much the only thing they have in Los Angeles, that they're going to give him the ball that many times. It's just that many more times for him to wear down and to possibly rack up injuries. Jared Goff, I don't think Jared Goff isn't even the starting quarterback at the moment. Case Keenum is. Their wide receiver situation is a complete mess. If you watch Hard Knocks at all, it just seems like their wide receivers are always hurt. Yeah. So you're going to have to rely on Todd Gurley. And if we know that they're going to give the ball to Todd Gurley, I would assume that the 31 other NFL teams know that the Rams are going to give the ball to Todd Gurley.
But here's the thing, right? So we had this conversation before we started the podcast. You could make that exact same argument for 22, 23, 24-year-old AP. He had nobody else either. He had no quarterbacks. He had no wide receivers. Everybody in the NFL knew AP was going to get the ball, and it just didn't matter. Is Todd Gurley that kind of player? I kind of feel like he is. I think he is that kind of player. He's that difference maker player that everyone in the room is going to know what he's going to do, and it's just not going to matter.
Yeah, and I'll make all those arguments that everyone knows he's going to get the ball. But yeah, Todd Gurley is a special player, and it really shouldn't affect his draft status. I don't think he should be. He's in the question for number 1 overall. I just think when you're going for dependability, though, I think unless it's a league where running backs get more points than wide receivers, I think you still have to give the edge to an Antonio Brown. I think you almost have to give the edge to Julio Jones, too. And if you want to even go crazier and take a quarterback overall, now I think the only way that a quarterback goes number 1 overall is if you're in a league where quarterbacks clearly get way more points than all the other players. So then the quarterbacks you would be looking at would be Cam Newton, Aaron Rodgers, and probably Russell Wilson. I'd probably put him at number 3. Do you feel strongly? I mean, Cam Newton, he's not going to have the season that he had last year. I think he had he went berserky the last couple weeks. He's not going to get over 10 touchdowns. I think there's a stat that says that any quarterback who had over 10 touchdowns, the next season, they didn't even reach half of that total. So I think you cut his touchdown total in half. I think he probably doesn't have as many rushing yards because I think they're going to rely on Jonathan Stewart. Hopefully he can stay healthy. And they have Kelvin Benjamin back. Devin Funchess is emerging as a better wide receiver. I just don't see the repeat performance from Cam Newton.
So you're making the argument then that if I was to be crazy and draft a quarterback number 1 overall, that the safer bet's going to be Mr. Aaron Rodgers, Mr. Relax himself.
I think it has to be Aaron Rodgers, even though he still had a decent season last year, but it was nothing like what we've seen from him. No. This year, he's got Eddie Lacy, a rejuvenated Eddie Lacy. Jordy Nelson is back healthy. You've got Randall Cobb, who's going to be playing in a more comfortable position that he's used to. And then you throw in any other wide receiver. And I think Aaron Rodgers returns to form, and he'll probably be the number 1 quarterback this year again.
I like that.
But I think Cam Newton is still going to be good. I think Cam Newton always gets written off. He was definitely, I wrote him off last year because I didn't think he could do it without Kelvin Benjamin. But he has shown that he can be productive. I just don't think he's going to have the MVP season that he had the year before.
So can Cam Newton, though, make up for the lack of rushing touchdowns, with the addition of Kelvin Benjamin and an emergence of Devin Funchess? Can he gain those points back through yards and touchdowns thrown?
No, I don't think so. I think if a quarterback can run and get those rushing touchdowns, that makes such a big difference. It balloons their point totals. So I don't think he's good enough at this point to really get those yards back through passing touchdowns.
Cool.
And Russell, I think it's really going to be it's going to be Aaron Rodgers, number 1, and then Russell Wilson and Cam Newton are both going to compete for that next spot. And who knows? Maybe Tom Brady, he comes back and he just blows everybody away. He's so angry that he throws for 4,500 yards and 40 touchdowns in only 12 games.
Hate-filled Brady is going to be solid this year.
And he's just going to rifle those balls at they're going to be so inflated.
Every touchdown he scores, he's going to point into the stands at Roger Goodell. Every single touchdown.
Just like Gary Bertier in Friday Night Lights.
He's going to have the point. It's going to be the Tom Brady point. He's going to throw for 7 touchdowns every game.
That's crazy talk. But who knows? Anything could happen. So is there any other quarterback that you would put into that level? I don't put Andrew Luck into that level. I think after last year, I think there's not a lot of questions, but there are still questions with him. He still has the talent, and he does have some decent wide receivers around him. I don't think they have a running game yet that they can rely on. So I think Andrew Luck he's in that next tier. I can't put him in the same tier with Aaron Rodgers and Cam Newton.
No, Andrew Luck, that last season really scared me. And maybe it shouldn't, and maybe he'll prove us all wrong, which I hope. That'd be great. But last season really scared me. It looked really bad. And makes you question, earlier success for him. I mean, I think I would rather have Drew Brees if we're talking between Brees and Luck. I think I'd rather have old man Brees. He's Mr. Consistent, and he's running the same offense that he's ran for the majority of his career, and he's got some studs around him.
Yeah. So first pick overall, who are you going to take? Can you answer a question for the fans and any of the Slackjaws who are listening?
Yeah, gun to my head, unless something major changes in the next few days, it's probably going to be Antonio Brown. It's too much to ignore. I'm ignoring too much analysis, too much stats to go somewhere else. So I think I will, when it comes time, I will confidently put the pick in and pray.
But close behind him, Julio Jones and Todd Gurley?
Yes.
Rob Gronkowski at all?
No. I don't feel like Gronk should be that high picked. Like, I mean, if I have 7, 8, 9, 10, then I feel like Gronk is awesome at that time.
I'm looking at you, Corey. But that about wraps it up for this episode of The Nerds, but I can't leave you without giving you my King's Decree. Now, up until now, I've been giving you a King's Decree based on a fantasy player, but I'm going to give you a little insight into my world, and I'm going to give a prediction for our big league, the Slackjaw League. And my prediction is one of my main starters will get hurt within the first 3 weeks. Now, I don't have any stats. I don't have any proven stats or facts to prove that this will actually happen.
You just got history.
I just have history. I can point back to seasons past, and I can say that my first couple round picks, they always seem to get hurt at some point. That's why I always warn people that whoever I take in the first 2 or 3 rounds are probably going to suck it up for you. Like an AJ Green or a Sean Richardson, a.k.a. Sean Alexander. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you my full roster after our draft. It may be too late for most of you, but hopefully you can wait until after September 3rd to draft your teams. Otherwise, you'll just have to live with me and hope that this prediction is wrong. But that is my King's Decree. That wraps up this episode of the Fantasy Nerds. I want to thank my brother Joel Jarvi for coming on with me and chatting about all this stuff. We're finally close to the draft.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jason.
Thanks for talking with me for an hour and putting up with Sean Richardson crap. But when we come back next week, we'll be on Christmas Eve. It'll be the day before fantasy draft, and I'll give you some last minute tips on drafts, and that'll do it for the Fantasy Nerds. Until next week, later, nerds.